Organization of popular Cretan literature in the networks of Greek critical discourse from Kornaros to Seferis. And today he's going to talk about the Athenocentric reception of Rotokritos. Alexander.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor for me also. One of the most, if not the most fundamental modes of canonizing a text in the Greek critical discourse of the 19th century was the designation of its national quality. Especially after the establishment of the Greek state in the decade of 1830, the pursuit for the national characteristics of every older literary text, in combination with the search of modern Greece's national poet, defines the rhetoric and ideological quality of the modern Greek critical discourse on literature and literary historiography. In this state of tension, in between collisions of scholars and literary or critical traditions, the definition of the term national concerning the literary text is being finalized. In order for a literary text to be crowned as national, it should meet three prerequisites. To have something to do, even vaguely, with ancient Greece or ancient Greek literature. Secondly, to be able to awaken or stimulate the patriotic morale. And finally, to have a historical value of linguistic or grammatological nature. A text that met all three criteria in terms of reception was Erotokritos, one of the most celebrated poems of early modern Greek literature, with 36 editions in the 19th century, while being vastly diffused in the oral tradition. The plot is taking place in a mythological space rarely and vaguely described, which Kornaros names Athens. It's the timeless idea of ancient Athens as a cradle of culture and civilization, and not the classical city itself. 2 out of 5 books, the second one and the fifth one, are describing vivid war scenes. Therefore, the reception of these parts during the 19th century was built on a heroic and patriotic framework which correlated with the occasional current events in Greece. For example, the revolution of 1821 or the Cretan insurrection of 1866. Finally, the poem's long process of nationalization began when Erotokritos was discovered in the beginning of the 19th century by the Greek scholars of Enlightenment who tried to redefine its historical and linguistic value. That's how you see it in the edition of Fotinos, is like in ancient Greek. That said, in this essay, I would like to examine the reception and discourse processes that led some scholars to uphold the idea that the national poem of Erotokritos is bonded with the 19th century city of Athens, a national metropolis in the making in many ways. In 1885, Konstantinos Sathas, an institutional researcher of history and Greek medieval literature, notes on Erotokritos and on Kornaros. Among other things, we read, "It's a mistake to believe that Erotokritos came out of Vitsendos Kornaros' head. I believe that the primal core of the poem should be ferreted outside Crete, especially in Athens or Thessaly, from where people immigrated in Crete after the end of the Arabic occupation." Kornaros transcribed or adapted the original and added his statement in the end. The resemblance of the Greek theme to the equivalent from many chivalric poems forced many scholars to search for the Frankish reference from which Erotokritos derived. However, those efforts made by the most educated and enthusiastic scholars of the chivalric poetry, who promoted the premeditated annihilation of the Greek epic, fell through. Unquote. Without hesitation or any proof whatsoever, Sathas proposes that the story of Erotokritos derives from a medieval heroic epic circle that was born in Athens and was very celebrated there for years to come. He places Erotokritos in the same grammatological context of the Athenian-Kritas, as you can read. Sathas ultimately claims that Erotokritos is an indicative poem of medieval Greece's metropolitan literary and folk tradition, just like the Aeneis was the mother poem of the Acritic literary tradition in medieval Greece. Let's not forget that the Aeneis manuscript of Trapezunda was discovered by Sathas himself. Therefore, the Cretan Venetian Kornaros, who was falsely identified a few years earlier by Sathas as a notary from mid-16th century Scythia, could not have been the writer, but the one who transcribed and adapted the story from this elusive Athenian epic circle, an ancient mysterious source, as Sathas writes. One will be surprised when he finds out that Sathas' imaginary and baseless theory had a few distinctive followers. Dimitrios Kabouroglu, in his History of Athens in 1889, a work that can be considered as a cultural and historical guide towards Athens' self-awareness as a modern and at the same time classical metropolis, notes that Erotokritos is an Athenian epic. Using examples from the well-prominent in Athens Demoric songs that deal with the story of Erotokritos and Arethusa, he concludes, I quote, "The belief that Arethusa was Athenian was deeply rooted in the conscience of the Athenian people. Until nowadays, one can spot Arethusa's cave in Piraeus, which was initially used as her prison and later on it became her tomb." Unquote. Additionally to Kabouroglu's folklore remarks, the most celebrated researcher of the Greek folklore, Nikolaos Politis, takes Sathas' theory to a new level in his celebrated study entitled Erotokritos, published in 1909. He also talks about Arethusa's cave, although he places it in the heart of Athens, just under the Acropolis, where the allegedly cave of Socrates can be found. Following that, along with other remarks on the folkloric diffusion of Erotokritos, he confirms Sathas' absurd assertions, and he also underlines, just like Sathas did, that the scholars in the past years were searching in vain for the Italian and European origins of Erotokritos, since the poem derives exclusively from the Greek literary and folk tradition, specifically from the literary tradition of Byzantium, Demoric songs, and the older Greek vernacular poetry. According to Politis, Erotokritos has nothing to do with the Italian Renaissance literature, since the Cretan Venetian Kornaros is not the poet, but merely a transcriber. As Kyriakidou Nestoros notes, the archaeological approach on folklore research on the popular literature in general is not aiming to produce knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but to produce knowledge that is bound to a solemn purpose. In Politis' case, this purpose aims at the de-westernization of Erotokritos and its severance from the erotic and chivalric literary tradition of Renaissance Europe in which it belongs. In the process of Erotokritos nationalization, its Catholic Cretan Venetian writer is denigrated to a simple transcriber, since his national and religious identity does not match that of a potential Greek national poet. Lacking an eponymous poet, Erotokritos' origins are lost in the mythological past space where the romantic Volksgeist is mixed with Byzantine elements and even those from ancient Greece. Taking all the above into consideration, we can support that the Athenocentric pattern of nationalizing Erotokritos is based upon two discourse pillars. First of all, the heterotopic inscription of Erotokritos in the city of Athens, and secondly, the de-westernization of Erotokritos by banishing the Frankish elements, as they called them back then, and by interpreting them as exclusively Greek, deriving from the Byzantine literature or the older modern Greek vernacular poetry. Michel Foucault defined the heterotopias as enacted utopias, where one can find himself absent from the place where he is, in that he sees himself in there. This mirror-like differentiation, in our occasion, is produced by the inscription of a literary topos in an existing place, in a material landmark. By this inscription, the landmark gains semantic value of symbolic power and is transformed to a literary heterotopia where the materiality and the symbol coexist in a constant hermeneutical potentiality. The heterotopic inscription of Erotokritos in the city of Athens and in Attica in general, were often pointed out by Greek and European scholars. When the English traveller Edward D. Clarke was residing in Bosporus in 1801-02, he mentioned that his host and the host family were reading every afternoon, among other things, the poem of Erotokritos, and I quote, "They pretend that the palace of Erotokritos is still to be seen at a place called Cava Colonna near Athens." However, a German philhelene and scholar, Adolf Ellison, is the first to have treated the association of Erotokritos with the city of Athens in a hermeneutical way in 1842. Ellison published an interesting translation in verse of the episode of Charydimos in German, accompanied with an intriguing introduction. Before Sathas or Politis, Ellison proposes that the Erotokritos plot derives from an old Athenian myth or story, which has survived in the memory of the people and can be found scattered in the Demoric songs also. Ellison's romantic interpretation is guided by the significance he attributes to the heterotopic inscription of Erotokritos in the city of Athens. He took the testimony of two Athenians into serious consideration of historic value. They informed him that the columns of Olympian Zeus are the remains of Heracles' palace. The folk imaginary tends to naturalize and materialize its favorite literary references. It places them in the space and time of everyday life while simplifying and canonizing them through the discourse network of orality and oral literature. Ellison attributed great historic and hermeneutical importance to the oral diffusion of Rotokritos in Athens and its naturalization. Therefore, he supported that the poem derives from an old Athenian myth. Even Yorgos Tetsetis, who was an Erotokritos enthusiast and referred to the poem as it being undoubtedly Cretan, emphasized on the poem's heterotopic imprinting in Athens. Furthermore, by connecting Erotokritos with Athens, Tetsetis is aiming also to give prominence to the national Panhellenic character